Thank you for tuning in to the Electric Church Podcast. My name is Craig. I am the founder of the Electric Church Podcast. This is the second half of my conversation with Mr. Pete Charpentier. I had to split the file into two files to make it uploadable easier. Anyways, I don't want to hold you up too much. If you already listened to the first half of the conversation, this is going to pick up right where we stopped. And if you haven't, you need to go back and listen to the first half of the conversation with Mr. Pete Charpentier. I just want to remind everybody quick that the sponsor of the Electric Church Podcast is none other than Chameleon Cafe. They are located off Highway 371, right next to Brainerd International Raceway. You can find them on Facebook, Instagram, Google, Twitter, and their hours are Wednesday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., and Sunday from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. They are closed on Mondays and Tuesdays. Those are their winter hours as of right now, the recording of this podcast. But check them out online if you're listening to this other than the winter of 2020, their hours might be different. Also check out their great barbecue rib night, first Friday of every month in the winter, every Friday in the summertime. Anyways, let's get right back into our conversation with Mr. Pete Charpentier. Yeah, you know, I one of the things that I like to think of, when, you know, like, I'm trying to get away from saying those things. When a newspaper prints a retraction, right? It's always like in the back, you know, small print. Nobody ever even notices it's there, and you know, like they just keep printing the headlines, and that's sort of what, like, big government feels like to me. Like they make a mistake, like they just, you know, they forget about it. It's on the back burner. You know, they're not going to go back and try to correct that legislation, fix the problem. They're just going to plow forward with more legislation. So yeah, you know, it feels like sometimes instead of like passing more bills, you need to go back and revise what you've done. You know, like, hey, you got some stuff here that's just, it's not working quite right. You know, you just got to go back and tune it up. You know, when's the last time we changed the oil and put in plugs on this government here, you know?
Well, and it's kind of that whole throwing out the baby with the bathwater thing, is that, you know, oftentimes when people want to address legislative things, they create this entire new 8,000-page thing, because by the time everybody's had their say on it, it's become this unwieldy piece of garbage that nobody really likes.
Yeah, and I'm really afraid of, like, if, you know, like, that's what UBI would become at a federal level, is everyone would get their little pork barrel product in there.
Exactly.
And I think it would just end up just crashing our economy.
Well,
we couldn't pay for this, and everything would go in the tubes.
Well, and that's a bigger issue overall, I think, of just the inefficiencies of government. You know, I mean, it's one of those things, you know, again, I support a lot of programs that are government programs, and I do recognize the inefficiencies of them, and I think that they need tweaking. But that's, you know, again, the thing. Is there a way that we can make these adjustments without another 8,000-page bill?
Right.
Can we just go back and say, hey, amendment to CR 381? You know, that
it seems way easier than writing a whole new thing, for sure.
Right, but then the lobbyists don't get paid.
Yeah,
and then
you know.
You know, and that's a sort of a cynical view, perhaps, but, you know, I will admit to having an abundance of cynicism in my world, but it's, you know, sort of the truth is that, you know, like you're saying, and this is, again, what I would throw at in terms of unfettered capitalism and how it interacts with our government anyway, is that it's become an industry to influence government. There is so much money
Yeah.
that is
Absolutely.
involved with
Richest
those
counties
things.
in the country are all around Washington D.C.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and it's, I mean, I've done some work in advocacy, as I said at the outset, you know, advocating for homelessness. And, you know, I've seen how things, I've had the opportunity to testify in front of a couple of House of Representatives committees here at the state capitol. And, you know, I've sort of seen firsthand the inner workings of just at the state level how these things operate. And, you know, I'm part of a group called Homes for All, which they're a nonprofit that's throughout the state of Minnesota. And they, you know, again, it's just housing advocacy. It's not a partisan group by any means. Just trying to advocate for homelessness and affordable housing and a bunch of different stuff, really. But I go to the Capitol and I see these people and I see all these things that are going on, and I'm just like, man, they got something crazy working here. I mean, there's so many people there all the time doing all these things. And, you know, it's, well, I mean, you use something out of your industry, too many cooks in the kitchen. You know, it's not efficient in any way. And that's, I mean, you know, there are a lot of philosophies of talking smaller government, particularly from, say, the right end of the spectrum, and, you know, the Republicans, we'll say. And I understand the concept behind that, but they're not talking about more efficient government necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, like, my biggest criticism of, well, no, I shouldn't say my biggest criticism, but one of the things that I definitely criticize the Republican Party for is they always talk about lowering spending and smaller government until they get into office, and they always increase the budget
Right.
every single time. The last last president to lower the budget was Coolidge, which, I mean, we're approaching almost 100 years on that. Or
Yeah.
over 100 years.
Yeah, you know, so, well, and that's the odd thing that I think, you know, people that tout themselves as fiscal conservatives, like you said, they're fiscally conservative when they're the opposing party.
Social programs.
Right. Well, and when the opposing party has the purse strings, well, we wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But as soon as they get into office, they do the exact opposite.
Oh,
I mean, you know, again, you know, Trump ran on a lot of saying we're going to cut the deficit. You know, he's got the best plan ever that he never told anybody about, and then he came into office and he raised it by $1 trillion. I mean, it's just it's out of control.
Yeah, small government, Space Force.
Right.
Wait, that's a turn I wasn't expecting.
Well, you know, but again, I think you got a guy that governs more by impulse than actual, you know, research and scientific thought or process to anything. I mean, he's eliminated any other sort of smart guy in the room and surrounded himself by nothing but a bunch of lapdogs. Again, there's my cynicism, but and I don't agree with his philosophy, so that it's accentuated in my mind probably. But it's one of those things that it's kind of a head scratcher for me, because, you know, outwardly his followers are, you know, applauding him for saying these things, and then he does the opposite, and they're like, well, this is better. Like, wait a minute. He said the one thing. Like, I mean, you know, this gets brought up a lot, but it's like, you know, we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. I'm like, first of all, how? And there was
tariffs, obviously.
Right? So no, wait a minute. We're going to pay for it.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, and again, it's one of those things. I mean, I'm not trying to start an argument with people over it. I'm just like pointing it out. Like seriously, take a rational look at what's happening around you. And if you think everything's awesome, there's something wrong with your brain. Because quite frankly, everything isn't awesome. You know, the Dow is up. That's good. How many of y'all have a stock portfolio? I don't. I got a 401k, kinda. But I'm fortunate to have that. I mean, you know, the vast majority of people who I meet in their red hats, again, I don't mean to pick on them because they're not here to defend themselves, but, you know, they say those things like that. The economy's great. I'm like, great. How's your stock portfolio? How diversified are you? What are you protected against in case something hits the fan? And they're like, I like pita. I'm like, well, but all right, dude, like you're touting this whole philosophy, but you got nothing to back it up, and that kind of irks me. Just saying.
I don't really like throwing my hat on any politicians. Yeah, or
Well,
my ring in their hat. I don't know how you would say it, but yeah, I'm just not a fan of politicians.
a lot of them are raging hypocrites.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've listened to the previous podcast, but I said on the last one, like I've never voted for a presidential candidate that won.
Sure.
So I understand disliking the president.
Right. Yeah, and oftentimes I think these things. It's two-party system. I mean, you end up voting for the lesser of two evils. I mean, really, in the last election, I was. I mean, like I said, I'm a Bernie guy, and I felt that the DNC really bent him, and he should have had the nomination, and I think he would have won. So it was with a heavy heart that I cast my vote for Hillary Clinton. It was not my choice necessarily, but I was convinced, and I'm still convinced, that she would have been at least more appropriate for that office than someone who had no knowledge or has the impulse control of a 5-year-old.
Sure.
No, and I could be wrong. I mean, it's
the one thing that at least I think the fact that Trump isn't a politician and didn't have all these other politicians surrounding him. I mean, there's several people who stopped him, who he told them to do something outright criminal and they just didn't do it.
Correct.
That's came out several times. So I think at least the people around him have protected him from extremely stupid decisions, which I don't necessarily think would have happened with Hillary Clinton. One of the things that really, has been pointed out recently is on the campaign trail, she said she would bring war to Iran, which at least we're not there.
Well, we're close,
like
but,
that. I mean, like I say, I didn't vote for either one of them.
Sure.
I voted third party, so I can criticize both of them. I didn't really care for either one of them. But you mentioned the lesser of two evils. I said before. I think that's sort of one of the problems with this nation is not only the duopoly, but even that sort of frame thought of like, voting for evil at all. I don't think that either side is necessarily actually evil by any means.
Sure.
And I think one of the things we tend to do is demonize and deify which, red hat wearers, have deified. And, I mean, there's certainly some politicians who are very cult of personality.
Huge.
Yeah. And that's definitely something that I think is just sort of poisonous to our society in general. I don't think these people should necessarily be looked up upon as leaders. They really are elected officials. They should be working for us. And I really wish the president would be more of the figurehead, like the pseudo Queen of England, versus this actual powerful politician. I think one of the nice things about the way our government is structured is it was meant to be inefficient in the way that government isn't supposed to do a lot of stuff.
Sure.
That's why there's so many members of Congress, so they can argue and slow stuff down.
Yeah.
The problem is they compromise too much, and they all shove their pork barrel in.
No, for sure.
So now it's become inefficient in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I will say too, as a caveat, I have a lot of friends who are huge Trump supporters, and I love them all to death. And I have differences of opinion, and I think that's one of the things that makes this country great is that you can You can't have that.
Right.
And I don't begrudge anyone their own personal opinions. You know, as I've said, I'm not a religious person. Got a lot of friends who are hugely religious, love them to death. Got a lot of people who, like I said, big Trump fans.
You said hugely.
Yes,
he's affecting you
bigly. No, but it's one of those things that I think you know. I mean, everybody has the right to their own opinion, and as I said earlier, I'm not right about everything. I don't know the answers to everything, and I totally agree with what you're saying in terms of like cult of personality and people being demonized on either. Like I see the rhetoric that gets tossed about sort of my end of the political spectrum, which would be obviously the left end, and again, I'm not going to label myself. I mean, I've called myself a raging liberal. I've called myself, you know, I'm a registered Democrat, though I sincerely considered not being a registered anything anymore. And I looked into trying to unregister, and it was too complicated, so I just said, whatever, I don't really care, because it doesn't define who I am as a human anyway.
Sure.
But, it, you know, really, you know, like this congressperson from, I think he's from Alabama. I forget. He was on the Judiciary Committee. He was one of the people in the impeachment hearings, and he said that, you know, the Democrats are embracing the terrorists and love the terrorists. And I'm just like, oh, come on, dude. That's just dangerous and stupid. I mean, nobody here is saying that we love Iran and that we think that they're I mean, you know, but the unfortunate thing is that you see these leaders out there that preach this rhetoric, and then people, they eat it up and they swallow it like it's reality. And that's, I mean, more of a concern I think that I have overall is that people don't, you know, they don't do the research. They post this crap on social media without. And I've been guilty of it on occasion myself. Sometimes I see something that I think is funny, and I'll just post it without verifying it, and then I'll later find out, oh, that was so not correct, you know. And so this dissemination of misinformation that I think both sides benefit from. You know, it causes this divisiveness, because if you look at the way things are portrayed, you'd think that we all hate each other.
Yeah.
And we don't, man. Like I said, I mean, I got like probably more than half of my Facebook is huge Trump supporters. These are people that I grew up with. These are people that I've known most of my life and that I love as human beings. And I don't give a shit if they like Trump or not. I mean, at the end of the day, they're decent human beings. And the things that maybe Trump supports that I'm not a fan of, they don't necessarily think that was a great idea either.
Yeah.
You know, when I sit down and I talk to actual human beings, we're a lot closer.
Right. Yeah.
In philosophy than people would lead you to believe, and that's what I want to spread on social media.
Yeah.
Is that, you know what, man, we aren't that far apart. We may have different ways to get to the same goal, but ultimately we often have the same goal in mind.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think, the drumming up of the bases, you know, is you know, they pick these hot button issues on either side, and that's literally what it is it's a button that they can press, that, you know, and it's a tweet that they can send out, and it's a soundbite that they can make on TV, and it's going to be like a little rallying cry for the people on their side, for their voters.
Yeah.
And it's like how the whole thing is kept together. It's how they keep this two-party system operating, because, you know, if they talk, I mean, like if you go back to, you know, Bush Gore, you know, how many times during that debate did they sit there and go, well, again, this is a subject where I agree with my opponent, you know? And I think that the huge division that we've been seeing since around 2016, when the world went a little crazy, until now, I think that is a direct result of they'd come so close together that it didn't seem to matter, and too many people had become disenfranchised with which way they were going to vote, or couldn't even decide. Like, doesn't matter who I'm voting for, So I think those two sides started to find ways to separate themselves and drum up those bases, and it got to a rapid freaking boil there for a while.
It's like, which Ivy League educated rich white guy do I vote for this time?
Right? Yeah.
That's kind of the thing. The Democrats often devolved into this culture of politics, or politics of culture, excuse me. And I think that's where a lot of folks, from where we come from, Middle America, whatever, looked at it and go, well, all the Democrats care about is if you're a minority, and they don't give a shit about the rest of us, which isn't accurate. But I can see why people would think that, because it's so much was that cultural and identity thing preached for so long. Because I think the point started out in a good place to say, you know what, we have ignored and not dealt with so many people that live in our world for so long that we need to bring that to the forefront and say, hey, these are all members of our society as well. I think that was the initial thought. It deviated far from that over the years, and I think a lot of people, your farmer in Iowa looked at that and said, well, you don't care about me.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was the intention.
Right. Yeah. You can go back to Martin Luther King, who said, I look forward to the day when my children are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin.
Absolutely.
And now, there definitely seems to be people who make a judgment based on their color. Mm-hmm. And those are, not just, racists and people but people on both extreme sides, where it's like, to prove how liberal I am, I'm going to hire an all-female lesbian staff, even if they're not qualified, Mm-hmm. Where, that's all they're looking at now, and that's not the idea at all.
Right. I would prefer to hire the most qualified candidate regardless of their ethnic background.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way things should be. And I have applied for positions previously where people have actually stated that they were looking to hire someone more diverse, and I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. No, it's a lot of things that have come up recently talking about white privilege, and this is something that I posted about a little bit, and again on the social media, which is people get goofy on the rhetoric of things, and what I try to do. Oftentimes, if I post something that I mean to be serious about, a lot of times I post just crap I find funny. So, but occasionally I see something that I go, whatever. And so a lot of times I will post an article or something, and all I will write is perspective. As in, this is a perspective, mm-hmm. and I would like people to consider it. Now, again, not every perspective is correct, but this was an article written by somebody from like middle class Iowa, but it was like grew up poor, and he's a white guy. And he's like, how do you explain white privilege and how that exists to a white person who's poor? Because I think oftentimes the term white privilege is a loaded thing that a lot of people, when they hear it, they make an assumption about what that means. And often that what that means to people is they look at it and go, well, my life is crap and I'm white, so don't try to tell me that I'm privileged. And okay, fair enough. I get that. There are a lot of people who are Caucasian and have had more struggles than I can possibly comprehend in life. The concept behind white privilege, however, at its core meaning is that you were not discriminated against because of your skin color. As in, like, if you turned on the television, oftentimes you could see a show that had people that looked like you in it. Mm-hmm. And, you maybe got pulled over because you're driving a rusted out POS after 10 p.m., but you didn't get pulled over because you were driving a rusted out POS after 10 p.m. because you were darker skinned. I've said before, I said earlier that, I'm kind of the middle class white guy. I am sort of the poster boy for white privilege, in that I have not ever been discriminated against because of being a white person. Now, that doesn't mean that I haven't been in environments where it wasn't real conducive to being a white guy. Because that happens.
Sure.
You know, and I've certainly been in those places. And in some of the situations where I've worked in my career, it has been detrimental for me to be a white person. And that, you know, not because I'm being discriminated against, but because the group that I'm working with doesn't trust me.
Sure.
Understandably.
Yeah. So, yeah, I understand the concept of white privilege, certainly, as you just described it. The problem I have is literally with, like, the phrasing of it.
It's very loaded.
Yeah, you know, I mean, the term privilege literally means, like, something special given to someone.
Right.
You know, which is, like, not what we're discussing. We're talking about lack of discrimination.
Right.
You know? Which, like I said, I fully understand, but it's like when you use that word privilege, it's sort of playing with words in a way that gets very hairy, you know, and it sort of puts the onus on white people just for being white instead of like those who discriminate against those, you know, like, and that's where the focus should be. It's like, you know, but it's like, that's what it feels like. It's like taking that responsibility of those people who are doing those bad things and just shoving it onto all white people.
Oh, the term is horrible. It's not helpful because of the reasons you mentioned. Labeling in political terms is something in messaging that I will say. The Republicans are far better at their messaging and their labeling, and they stick to it really well. The left end of the spectrum is horrible.
Not as good.
Oh goodness, no.
You know?
Well, I mean, it's like, you know, another controversial subject is you know, abortion. It's been a wedge issue for a lot of things, and you know, the right. The Republicans have always said that they're pro-life. Who in the hell isn't pro-life, man? I mean, you know, and so labeling in terms of and messaging, I mean, you know, that is a strong message. We are for life. You know, until you become a sucker of societal means and programs, then we want to get rid of you. But you know, until you're born, man, we are pro-life. But you know, it's the thing is that labeling and the messaging, and that's the thing where the term white privilege is, like I said, it's loaded. The connotation of it is misconstrued, and it's not awesomely descriptive of what it really is. Yeah, you know, because like you said, it's more about not being discriminated against versus being discriminated against, and you know, it's maybe one of those things that's tougher to find a good label for.
Yeah, like democratic socialism is another one where they're like, horrible.
Goodness.
So you're saying I'm voting for socialism.
Right.
That's what you're saying, you know, like horrible phrasing, guys. Yeah. Horrible phrasing.
And that's the thing, you know, like I said, I'm a Bernie guy, and, you know, and that label gets put on Bernie, and it's, you know.
It's so easy to just cut off the Democratic.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's been a lot of the messaging on the right has been, you know, socialists, these crazy socialist Democrats. And like, whoa. First of all, the countries that we even look at in terms of emulating socialism aren't socialist. I mean, the Scandinavian countries aren't actually socialist.
Not at all, yeah.
You know, they're capitalistic societies that have strong social programs.
Yeah.
And that's the same that Bernie is. He's, you know, we want to elect a government. We don't want, you know, the government to own the means of production, which is the definition of socialism. Yeah. You know, we want capitalism. We want, you know, market economies. We want competitiveness.
All those things are what make those Nordic countries run so well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they actually have like much less regulation on their markets than we have.
You know, and as we kind of discussed earlier, I mean, you know, well, a lot of the problem in implementing any sort of system in a country the size of the United States is it's so vast that it's very difficult.
It's very it's hard to scale anything to 320 million
whatever
people.
It is now. Yeah, it is. It's difficult. I mean, it's the same in large countries like China and the Soviet Union or Russia, whatever. And I get used to these Cold War terms. Date myself a little bit, but things like that. These countries in a smaller instance, these sort of utopian concepts of government are far easier to implement than they are on a large scale, and so I mean the United States is so unique in that we essentially are like the Europe as a continent versus a country, because our states are the size of countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
In Europe, and they've sort of loosely done the European Union thing, and some things have been good with that, some things have not been so good with that, and they're still trying to figure it out. But the individual countries on their own, some of them are thriving, phenomenally. Some of them are, like any country. But and so what we have here, from a federal government to a state government to a county government, there's a whole lot of governments.
Yeah.
But I mean, the states' rights issues and some of those things. I think there are some, legitimacies to, letting the states determine a lot of these things. Again, some states are better than others in terms of a lot of things. And, getting back to the cannabis prohibition thing, I think, Colorado and Washington and some of those places. I think Colorado sort of the forefront of it, and I lived there for a couple of years prior to their, making cannabis legal, but it was always part of their culture there. When I lived there in the early 90s, people were smoking bowls walking down the street, and it wasn't any big deal. The cops had better things to do with their time. Was it still illegal? Yeah. It's kind of like in Jamaica. You go to Jamaica.
Yeah, it's illegal, but it's everywhere.
Yeah, nobody really blinks an eye if you're smoking weed. But in in Colorado, it was a similar thing. I was living in Vail. They had this celebration at the end of the year, and it was called the BB&B, which is like beers, boards, and buds, or some comedy. I had spent a long time. So, and you'd be up on the hill, and people are like smoking giant bongs, and all of a sudden people were walking around eating mushrooms, which maybe wasn't quite the best idea ever when you're on a hill.
True, when you're skiing,
I don't know that I would do that. Well, and quite frankly, I don't even like smoking weed and skiing, because I'm not one of those guys that can function very well. Like, I'm more one of those guys who wants to eat a bag of Doritos and watch TV, so don't make me do physical stuff. But anyway, some people were just like that. They put them in the zone and they could really just focus.
A lot of jiu-jitsu guys swear by it.
Sure, and it doesn't work that way in my brain for whatever reason, but that's okay. I don't begrudge anyone who can function normally. But anyways, you look at how things have operated in Colorado, and they have, I think, done well. The cannabis prohibitionists have still tried to say that, there's all these issues, people are driving, and that's not real. that's just rhetoric, and if you look at the real numbers out there,
the increase in population is the exact same as the increase in car crashes.
Oh, dude, and from back in the early 90s, people were moving there from California back then, dude. This was not a new thing.
Yeah.
And Colorado is a tremendously odd place. When I lived there in the early 90s, I come from Minnesota. I'm not a cowboy. Colorado got a lot of cowboys. I am not a hippie. I'm more of a punk rock dude. So I like to listen to loud, angry music, not a song that goes on for 45 minutes with no particular reason to it.
Oh, wow. Well, we're never going to hang out with the records then.
Well, jam bands aren't really my thing. It depends. I can get, there are a couple of Grateful Dead songs that I can deal with. Fish makes me kind of want to go away.
Yeah, no. Sorry, Fish fans, but that's just, it's banned from my restaurant.
But so this is when I was in, again, early 90s Colorado. Everybody was smelling like patchouli and playing hacky sack. And,
well, you know why they wear patchouli, right?
Well, because it covers up the body odor.
Well, yeah, because they can't find the shower.
Yeah. Well, initially that was used to cover the decay of flesh.
Dead bodies, yeah.
Yeah,
I think it was actually rotting flesh from what the heck? I can't think of it now.
The plague, maybe?
No, not the plague. It'll come to me. leprosy.
No, yeah, that'll do it too.
Yeah.
Either way, but so I mean, it was a tremendously odd mix of like cowboys and hippies, and I don't really fit with either. I hung more with the hippies because they're more my vibe than the cowboys. But I never really felt like I fit in with either of them very well, anyway. But yeah, it was still this philosophy of sort of openness toward cannabis. And it's funny, I saw Jello Biafra speak at my college, and his spoken word thing was sponsored by the Colorado Hemp Initiative. I actually had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with him there because I met him afterwards, and a really interesting individual. And obviously punk rock icon. And I was fanboying all over the place, so I was kind of a giant dork. But, again, it was kind of cool because he was sponsored by the Colorado Hemp Initiative, Jello Biafra. Interesting times, the 90s. But again, I think Colorado has been at the forefront of cannabis support and eliminating prohibition for a long time. And I think, they've done some good with it. They've raised some money. They're going to use some of the taxes that they put on it, not extreme taxes, but there should be a taxation, and take those taxes and utilize. They're utilizing some of that to address their homeless problem. And I think, we talked earlier a little bit about revenue and how the deficit is kind of out of control and things like that. And I think, you would maybe be more supportive of a tax where on something like that, because it's not something that is necessary. I mean, as a consumer, you're making a choice to purchase that product.
I'm in favor exclusively of sales tax.
Sure.
I think the government should operate exclusively off sales tax and voluntary income tax. So instead of filling out what is W-4 or whatever at the end, or when you start a job, fill that out, and this is how much you're going to deduct. I think it should be a voluntary. I'm like, I want to give this percentage or this dollar amount to these places. And that's going to be a great way to instantly increase the funds of the National Park Service and decrease the funds of the DEA and the military. That's going to be great.
Well, but
the point being, and funny as it is, it's realistic that if you have unpopular government programs or unpopular, government agencies, they're just going to get defunded by, to the point where they're going to have to change what they're doing.
Well, that's another meme that I've seen out there frequently is the guy saying that if the government's going to keep taking my money, can I at least get a picture of the welfare family that I'm supporting? And now that ticks me off because it's not accurate. But then the response to that meme is then Halliburton and it's these big corporations. You want to know who you're supporting? Ultimately, the military-industrial complex and all these other things. Because if you look at the social programs portion of the overall federal budget, it is a teeny tiny little sliver that we're talking about, and these are the programs that the government always wants to talk about. Well, Social Security is taking away all of our. First of all, Social Security is a whole other line item altogether. That's paid into
funded exclusively by these
payroll tax. It is not a part of the budget deficit in any way, shape, or form. But this is where this whole uninformed populace comes into play, in that you throw out these sound bites.
Yep.
And you got Dick Cheney or whoever. I mean, I know that's not current, but up there making the it's about the Social Security, sounding like the Penguin from old school Batman, but people they go, well, the government told me this, so I'm just going to believe them, and they don't look into it any further, and it's a talking point, and it stirs up the base like we talked about, and on either side, and it's like, man, if you're going to get foaming at the mouth, angry about something, at least make sure that your information is accurate.
Yeah.
And again, I'm guilty of it too. There's
we all get fooled.
Well, I talk about confirmation bias is another thing that I like to throw out there in terms of looking at these things too, and that's the whole concept that we seek out information that reinforces what we already believe.
For sure. Yep.
And we are all guilty of it to some extent.
Absolutely.
But I really, really try hard. when I see something, because there's stuff that I see on my end and I go, man, that doesn't sound right. That's pretty friggin' weird. That's pretty extreme, and then I'll look it up and go, oh, that is completely fabricated, or they took this little bit of information and extrapolated it into some bullshit, and I'm like, and I see it on the other side. I mean, again, it's
both
all
sides do it. Yep.
All sides, and that's all that I really wish people would do is just take 5 minutes, man. Google is a phenomenal tool.
Yeah, right?
And
you got to filter through a few different...
For sure.
Yeah, the first ones at the top are going to be... Yeah.
But I mean, if it says Breitbart on it, if it says InfoWars on it, and people like to point and say that CNN is all bullshit. They're not. They are a fairly legitimate source. I will tell you that they are incorrect and they have had their problems. And I don't solely glean my information from that one source either, but they are far more legitimate than, say, Breitbart.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, but and you look, okay, so like Huffington Post. 90% bullshit. There's some other ones on the left that I don't even look at them anymore because I just know it's crap. And there's this guy that
Mother Jones.
Oh yeah,
one that I found to be like. Yeah.
There's some that just you look at and you go, come on now.
Yeah.
And so I like National Public Radio, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. The New York Times gets lambasted as this far left thing, but it's so not. I mean, is their editorial board maybe bent that direction? Sure. But when you read like the full on just legitimate reporting on stuff, it's pretty good. Same with the Washington Post. I mean, is their editorial board kind of lefty? Sure. But they do provide accurate information.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, any like news source like the
BBC.
Any established. Yeah,
there is some,
and they're all gonna, and they're all gonna have their little editorial lean. Like there's definitely a difference between. I mean, you'll have the same information and the same story, and if you watch Fox or MSNBC, you're gonna get a completely different take on the exact same information.
Sure. Although both of those,
and they're both reporting the same thing. They're just coming at it from a different way.
I will say, like, if you look at Fox and CNN and MSNBC, you watch them during the daytime, which I don't get to do very frequently because, job and whatever, but the daytime reporting tends to be fairly factual on all of them.
Yeah. The
later into the evening you go,
well,
the more crazy
they're competing for those entertainment slots.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing.
Like if you start getting into Tucker Carlson and those people on Fox, and they're all very biased in what they're saying. Same, you get into Chris Cuomo and Don Lemon on CNN.
Rachel Maddow.
That's the thing. The thing is, I respect Rachel Maddow, but her reporting is ridiculous on so many things. She's an intelligent person.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I do not. Yeah, I don't I can't stand watching her, and that's my end of the spectrum, and I still can't stand it.
Yeah. When any of them get too far to the side,
I start shaking my head.
Yeah, I mean, when they can't control it themselves, where they're just openly mocking the other side. Or,
that's pretty weak.
It's just exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's weak sauce. Attack the ideas, or but yeah. For sure.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. I mean, I look at that stuff, and I just, so many people get frothy about it, and I'm just like, check your stuff at the door a little bit, and just look into the reality of it, because again, you and I can sit down here and have a conversation, and not attack each other, and not be weird. I mean, we're a lot closer on a lot of things than most people might think, but. It's the same thing. When I sit down, I go down to Shops quite a bit. I mean, that's my place. I'm a former Grand Elbow. I hang out there a lot. There are a lot of folks there that are big on the right end of the spectrum. But the fact of the matter is, anytime I sit down and have a conversation with any of them, it's fine.
Yeah.
We don't get mad at each other. We don't get all stupid. And the thing is, sometimes you agree to disagree, and that's fine. But that is what the discourse really is in the world. It's not this divisive bullshit that social media would have us believe, or the giant media conglomerates, or the
even
parties.
or even the politicians that. Not to pick on one of my least favorite subjects is other people.
Mm-hmm.
I like talking about philosophy, policy, not so much.
Absolutely.
But when Maxine Waters was like, you go out and you confront people, I was like, what in the world are you thinking? That's a really bad idea. That's really easy to misconstrue.
Oh yeah. Well, that's why we get these folks that are emboldened to go out. And I think unfortunately, and whether you want to attribute any of this to Trump's idiocy in the way he presents things sometimes. Again, I'm attacking his presentation.
Sure.
The man is
he's
not
very uncouth.
Yeah. And so some of that...
Not somebody I would invite to a party.
Right. And so he, on some level, he has emboldened a bit of this nationalist neo-Nazi bullshit, Now, I'm not saying that that's who he is or what he supports, but I believe that some of the way he has put things has given them the feeling that they should be able to be more open. And so...
which, you know what, that's kind of like where I like my bigotry and racism.
Right, it's easier.
It's right out in the open. Go ahead.
For sure.
Yeah.
But it's like you see that, and so you see some of these folks that have been, pretty outspoken white nationalists, and some of the stuff that happened in Charlottesville and whatever, and it's like. I do agree. It's nice that we have it out in the public a little bit too, but it was also kind of nice when people felt like they should be a little ashamed by that too.
Oh, but I think the only way they're going to change their mind is by being open about it, and then being confronted about it over and over and over again by multiple people, and I guess that and I think if you're racist, your IQ's probably a little lower and maybe can't figure this one out. But there's a reason that you're ashamed to talk about it, and that's because it's not something you should be proud of.
It's not okay.
It's not a good idea. No. Like, we're all human beings. I believe very stringently in human rights.
Absolutely,
we're all humans. We all should have the same rights.
Right.
I find that perplexing, and I always I was telling this the future guest Kyle, because he was kind of lumping sort of racists into Republicans, and I like to say I think there's a huge difference there. I think
huge. Yeah.
Racists might vote for Republicans,
right,
but they're not necessarily Republicans.
So Bill Maher, I know a lot of people have some strong feelings about Bill Maher. I find him humorous. Again, he's kind of from my end of the spectrum. He says some stuff that I'm like, dude, shut your pie hole. but because I don't agree with him on everything. But one of the things that he said, and he's not the only person who says it, he's like, not all Republicans are racists, but all racists tend to be Republicans. Now, and there's a good distinction there, and it's pretty inflammatory rhetoric yet again. But there is, I think, if you look at it currently, that does tend to be the case. And like I said, I have so many friends who are Republicans and wonderful human beings, and I love them, and they are not racist. They are not jerks. They are not ignorant. They have a differing perspective on, again, how to accomplish the same goals we all want to accomplish.
Sure.
And I respect that. But and a lot of the people like to talk about this in terms of the history of the parties, and that the Southern Democrats previously were slave people and endorsed that, stuff back in the day. And, there was a period of time where that sort of flipped. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and obviously he freed the slaves. People like to glom onto that. The Republican Party of today is not Abraham Lincoln's party.
No, yeah. I think the parties overall have sort of sway back and forth in a weird way. I know somebody who, they told me that they voted for JFK because they were so desperately afraid of Goldwater, and that person today is a Trump voter, and that's like that's a long, and I mean, and for me, that is a dream election. Goldwater versus JFK. I don't know who to pick. I kind of like both of those people a lot.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's, well, and the interesting thing too, I mean, I think it's been pointed out on numerous occasions that people have said that, yeah, sure, you're going to be young and idealistic, and you're going to be a little more liberal when you're younger, and as you get older, you become more conservative. I don't think that's the case. Again, I mean, defining these roles and trying to put people in a box, I don't think is always productive, because I don't necessarily adhere to any one particular philosophy completely. I mean, there are aspects of, yes, the Democratic Party that speak more to my overall general philosophy, but that again does not define who I am as a person.
Yeah, there's a lot of diversity within those two parties. I mean, Barack Obama and AOC are not really on the same page.
No. Well, and there were plenty of things that Obama did that I was not a fan of. I mean, the continued bombing and drone strikes and stuff. I mean, I was not happy.
Right? Yeah.
I was not. I am a fan of universal health care. I was not a fan of the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, everybody got their grubby little hands in there.
Oh, my goodness. Here, again, I will be a little uncouth in my description, but it was a blowjob to the insurance industry.
Ooh, that's a great way to put it.
Because to me, and this is...
Well, but, to be fair, Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare, that was a giant fuck for the excuse me, flubbing my peas.
Yeah.
The pharmaceutical industry. It's written into Medicare, Medicaid that the government has to pay for full market price on those drugs, and that's caused part of the problem that led to ACA.
Yeah.
So they got theirs, man. They're getting
sure.
They're getting their money in hand over fist. It was time for the insurance company to get their
right. Well, and this is so. I sold insurance briefly, and I mean, with my job, I have to deal with Medicare, Medicaid, all that kind of stuff all the time. So I mean, I was actually licensed as a selling health insurance at one point, so I understand. As much as anyone really can understand the intricacies of these things, and I understood it well enough to pass a state test, which maybe isn't saying much, but it was I have more knowledge than maybe your average dude on the street.
Yeah.
And then this has been my description of the insurance industry for some time, is that I believe they should be indicted under the RICO statutes, because all we're doing is paying protection money. And to me, it's no better than the mob, because if you look at the way these things are structured and these big corporate entities, like say what Blue Cross Blue Shield, whatever, they have it set up so where you go and you try to utilize this benefit that you're paying for, and they will deny things just out of hand.
Yeah.
Not because they're necessarily not permitted under the structure of your particular contract, but because it creates a barrier for you. And the average person doesn't necessarily understand, I can appeal that, I can change that. You look at like the prior authorizations the doctors have to do for medications. I have diabetes, so I have to deal with some bullshit and some medications that are really expensive, and for me to move from one medication to another one, the doctor has to justify to the insurance company why I need that medication. So somehow it's the insurance company, who is not a doctor, deciding for me the best medication for my body. Now, the insurance company does have doctors that they consult, but typically they read something, they go, check a box. You know, instead of my doctor who's been working with me for years and says, okay, well, you know, your metabolism's changed a little bit and we're going to try this other medication right now because I don't think we're getting as good a control as we could with this other medication. So he writes what they call a prior authorization. It goes to the insurance company. The insurance company denies it. So then the doctor has to write some more stuff. And meanwhile, I'm going to the pharmacy, and the pharmacy says this isn't covered. If you still want it, it's going to be $1,700. And I'm like, well, I could go without it, but I don't get to eat. And then, so eventually that's going to kill me. I mean, it may not kill me today.
Yeah.
Or, you know, the alternative would be that eventually my internal organs fail. They start cutting off body parts, and I end up dead. Slower. You know, so thank you, insurance company, for denying that for me. And again, I mean, there are going to be people who want to say that the insurance company isn't the bad guy, but ultimately this is, again, this sort of unfettered capitalism of they're trying to maximize their profits. So they got people strategically placed to deny claims.
Well, to say it's unfettered is really disingenuous
it's not,
because
yeah.
It's been highly structured and regulated to benefit them.
Well, right.
This is where, you know, government and big industry, they got together and, yeah, like you said, hey, it's a blowjob for them.
Yeah.
You know, so to sort of piggyback on this topic, a fellow named Andrew Heaton, who's a comedian and writer and podcaster and everything else, he had this great take on sort of a simpler solution, which I thought was really good. And so to sort of paraphrase sort of what his idea is you know, to treat health insurance more like we treat car insurance, right? So you need to have some sort of health insurance, right? But there can be a lot more variability to it, right? So, you know, if you need a tank of gas, you know, insurance doesn't cover that. If you need new wheels on your car, insurance doesn't cover that, right? If you need a new distributor, basic maintenance of the vehicle itself is on you. That's not covered by insurance. But health insurance overall, basically, anytime you go to the doctor, insurance gets involved.
Right.
And that's where things get really kind of mucky, you know, when you end up with deductibles and everything else. And so Andrew Heaton has this he says basically we just need to strip most of these regulations away and treat it more like auto insurance, where you have to have it, but you're allowed to make sort of almost any sort of structure you want. So, you know, those people that have a big family, you know, and whatever, and have a lot of kids that might be getting sick a lot and they need a lot of insurance coverage, they can work out some sort of plan like that. But, you know, maybe someone like you or me that is looking at more like catastrophic, you know, like, hey, I take good care of I suppose you would want. You would need a completely different structure than me. Whereas, like, you know, hey, I go to the doctor less than once a year. Sure. You know, and I don't need some sort of big insurance plan that's going to cover me unless I'm so sick I'm going to the doctor. You know, and other than that, it's that, you know, like the checkup and. I need something that covers me if I break a bone or if, you know, something major catastrophically goes wrong. But basically, you know, I want sort of a liability only insurance plan.
Sure. Well, you know, and a lot of this, because the insurance industry is not the only player involved here. I mean, you mentioned the pharmaceutical, but also the medical industry. And when you start looking at care from like doctors and managed care and those things like that, it's gone the route of, again, maximizing profits. Like if you look back at our medical stuff here in the Brainerd Lakes area, back when the nuns still were involved with the Benedictine health system before Essentia bought them out at St. Joseph's Medical Center. They had things in place called like Benedictine care, where you could go in, and if you were struggling to pay your bills, they would structure a payment plan for you. And you can kind of do that with Essentia, but not on the same level. You know, and what is happened, that was not a fiscal model that was sustainable forever. The nuns, and as a recovering Catholic, I never thought I'd ever say something like this, but I miss the nuns because there was more compassion to the care. There was, because the Benedictine order really,
religion collectively is the biggest charity in the world. Yeah.
But the Benedictine order, they're very much about education and healthcare, which are two things that I'm pretty passionate about to begin with. So I find some common ground with those folks. They start talking about Jesus, and then I'm like, yeah, you go somewhere else. But anyway, it's one of those things that they're the compassion piece. And again, religion as a piece of social work, and I actually went to social work school through St. Scholastica, so again, I might be a little bit biased there, but it's historically you go back to the early days of social work, and that was all charitable church programs. But which is where, when we look at how this medical thing transpired, it was a similar thing, is that was not fiscally sustainable. Solely based on donations. And then so the government got involved in some things, and there's some inefficiencies there too. But so if you look at, so then Essentia comes in, and buys out the nuns and says, all right, we're going to take this over. Then they start judging doctors in terms of productivity, and how much, how many patients are you seeing, because we can bill insurance based on
how many patients.
Because a lot of these things are encounter rates versus timed rates. So if your doctor gets $400 every time he sees a patient, if he comes in and sees you for 5 minutes or 30 minutes, what do you think the hospital wants that doctor to do? This is why you see nurses and you talk to nurses, and when the doctor comes in, it's typically very brief. Again, and this isn't the doctor's fault necessarily. It's this, as we've moved into these managed care things where they're trying to maximize profits. And again, there's some industries that, in my opinion, when we talk about profit, not nonprofit doesn't mean you're not making money. I fully understand that.
Well, that's something most people don't understand.
Exactly.
Is that nonprofit doesn't mean that you can't actually make a profit. Nonprofit means that the shareholders that funded the initial startup can't draw an income based solely off the fact that they put money into it. If the shareholders themselves also work for the company, then they're working for the company,
and they draw a salary.
And that's actually what the NFL did for many years, is they were a non-profit,
right?
And then they're paying, obviously, their commissioners and everybody millions and millions and millions of dollars, and obviously they're making lots and lots of money. And I guess the reason the NFL finally switched from being a non-profit was just because the amount of when you're a nonprofit, you have to make your salaries for your your top executives or whatever public. And so this way they didn't have to tell everybody
how much getting 25 million.
How much? 25 mil. Probably.
Well,
probably closer to 400.
Yeah, probably. It's ridiculous.
Some ridiculous thing. So, anyways, to continue on the idea here of healthcare, and the extreme high cost of it. Something that I picked up off a podcast, somebody talking about this who is way smarter than me about it, was saying, one of the things we need high profit margins within the healthcare industry. You look at, again, memes, where it's like, this saline bag costs $1 and, it costs $400 at the hospital, and that is an insane markup, but you think about not only how much staff you need to operate a hospital and all the electricity and backup and everything else you need, but you need to have big profits to be able to have innovation. I mean, we've seen how long it was before we had tons and tons of innovation in the medical. I mean, it's really the last 50, 70 years that we've gone leaps and bounds to solving a lot of these, problems that have been around for thousands of years in people.
And the pharmaceutical industry will say the same thing about their prices.
Yeah. Oh, well, they have their, and again, this is something I'm by no means an expert on, but yeah, I mean, it does cost a lot of money to develop a drug. But yeah, I think ultimately the problem that we both recognize here is this sort of unholy trinity union of big healthcare, big pharmaceutical, and big government. And big insurance, actually, I guess.
It is. It's a multi-faced issue, and
it's a hydra.
It is. It really is. Well, and like Hydra, you cut off one head, and
it doesn't matter.
Right. So no, it really is one of those things, and I think if you're going to address it, you need to address all facets of it. You can't just do one. You can't just do insurance, and that's where these things get. And again, I don't have the answers.
Yeah. But you're just recognizing problems and throwing some spaghetti at the wall.
Right. But it's one of those things that it does need to be addressed. And if you truly want to reform healthcare, on any level, whether it's insurance or whatever, you need to address all these things. Because you start looking at models in other countries, and Japan's one that gets used frequently because they're fairly innovative. And they have levels of universal health care available and whatever. And I'm not saying I'm an expert on how stuff runs in Japan, because I'm not. I've seen a couple of things and read a couple of things on it, so I'm vaguely familiar with it. But, part of the thing is that they limit, because if you go here in Minnesota even, if I go get an x-ray at St. Joe's, or if I go down to St. Cloud and get an x-ray, that could be a vastly different expenditure. Because there is no sort of this is what you get to charge kind of thing, and you look at a lot of these medical things, and they're often sort of a la carte.
And healthcare is generally not an industry that you're going to shop the market on.
Right. Yeah,
like when you need healthcare, you need healthcare now.
Right.
You're not going to be like, oh, well, this other doctor, he's so much cheaper.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's weird. I mean, it's an odd parallel, like having your animal spayed or neutered. Like I go to Lakeland Vet in Baxter typically for things because I think they do a phenomenal job. They have great staff. They do great things over there. Not cheap. When I get my cat fixed, I'm taking them to Motley, to the vet out there.
Just so much cheaper.
It is, but again,
but it's not your balls,
right? Not my balls, and it's not an emergency. But yeah, you're right. I mean, healthcare we don't shop around. I mean, and particularly in rural communities, and this is where a lot of it is a struggle. There may be only one provider. I mean, we have a little bit of variety here now. I mean, we can get into Crosby a little bit because they got a clinic in Baxter now, and so it's not just Essentia. And this is an area where I would say the competitiveness is helpful because if you bring in some competition, maybe the prices aren't going to be super high, unless we get into these historical issues of price fixing between competitors.
Oh, and another thing that I think happens in the healthcare industry in this nation is where there's some sort of weird law where your competition needs to decide whether there's a need for you or not. So, I mean, the local clinic can just say, "Oh, no, we don't need another clinic in this town."
Right.
Yeah, like that. I'm sure there's plenty of restaurants in the area that would have said, "No, we don't need another restaurant to open."
Right. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you got to understand, and again, this is a strength of sort of capitalism, is that you need to understand the market and find your place in it too. I mean, you aren't Applebee's.
Yeah.
Because there's 5 other friggin' Applebee's type restaurants in the area.
Yeah.
And thank you, by the way, for not being Applebee's. I'm going to keep dogging out Applebee's because they're not my favorite. And, they're big corporate yuck. Anyway, but, I mean, it's not to say. I mean, there's sometimes I've had a French onion soup there that I didn't hate. So they got that going, which is nice.
Yeah. I don't know if I've ever eaten at the Applebee's here in town, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, it's not my favorite. I've been there a couple of times. I used to eat there on occasion with my parents, but it's again, knowing your niche and knowing your market and expanding toward that, I guess, is sort of one of the ideals of capitalism, and in a way that where it is helpful.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
competition brings better product. I mean,
most of the time, not always, but most of the time.
Overall, in the long run,
Yeah.
I mean, computers are definitely better now.
Oh yeah, but that and that's the thing. Like we look at because I want to go back, to Walmart or something. I mean, I remember when going back to Colorado, I lived in Durango.
Well, it will give you the market will also give you a variety of everything. Yes, but there's everywhere from Kias to Cadillacs.
Yeah, but so Durango wouldn't let Walmart come in, because they had a lot of little mom and pop stores, and the Walmart business model, and this is the evil side of capitalism, is that you come in, you undercut all the mom and pops, you make them go out of business, and then you're the only game in town. Now, I mean, Brainerd's big enough, obviously, the Brainerd, Baxter, Lakes area, whatever you want to call it, is big enough, obviously, to have, a Walmart and a Target and a Fleet Farm and a whatever, and be able to sustain that. But, historically, in smaller populated towns, Walmart has just been notorious for coming in and wiping out the competition.
Yeah.
Because you can come in there, and when you have that ginormous corporate, we buy at bulk rates that none of the little mom and pops around here can sustain, and then you're coming into a community that is somewhat economically depressed to begin with. So when people have a cheaper alternative, they can't really afford not to take advantage. Mm-hmm. I mean, I always try to support local businesses. Like, I'm going to go to Cocoa Moon and get a coffee before I go to Starbucks or Caribou, because I'd rather support a locally owned person, and business. And again, I'd rather eat here than an Applebee's or whatever, even if it's locally franchised, I don't care. I would rather support people local who are doing, it's like Prairie Bay. I would much rather go to, I mean, you say Prairie Bay or Applebee's, there's just no, the food quality is phenomenally better anyway, but even so, I mean, I want to support local. But again, not everybody has that philosophy. The convenient side of your Applebee's is that you can go to any state in the United States and get that same rubbery ass steak and know that you're going to get that. Mm-hmm. So some people thrive on that consistency piece.
Even if that consistency is shit.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's an industry, and so you look at the Applebee's of healthcare, if you will.
Sure.
I mean, and that's sort of the thing, is you get your standard Americana healthcare, and then you have some niche people that come in and do a couple of things. But that's the unfortunate thing, is in rural communities, if you want to go out and have a sit-down restaurant, oftentimes that's what you got is an Applebee's.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of healthcare you're getting, and it's mental health too. I mean, we talked earlier, and you talked earlier about shutting down the mental health beds, and I think that was an area that I want to explore too. Although you're going to have an 18-hour podcast here, but it's one of those things, because I work in mental health frequently, and they've eliminated so many beds. I mean, the concept at the outset was that far too many people are being institutionalized. Mm-hmm. I'd say that was accurate. So we're going to manage all these folks in the community. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and pump the brakes on that thought, because there are so many people who are not necessarily manageable in the community. Or, here's the thing, mental health is a fluid issue. It ebbs and it flows. It doesn't stay static throughout lifetime.
For sure.
So sometimes
there was probably a lot of people who should have been locked up in 2016, me included.
Goodness. Well,
I very much, I think the whole world went crazy there.
Yeah, a little bit. But, the thing is, so now I try to find beds for clients and to people who are really off the deep end and in need of desperate help. And I mean, I had a guy who was under commitment. And typically when you're under commitment for mental health, you are residing in an inpatient hospital setting until they get you stabilized. He was living at the homeless shelter in Minneapolis while under commitment because there were no beds available. This man was deemed committable by the state of Minnesota, was committed to the Commissioner of Human Services, and residing at a homeless shelter because they didn't have any beds.
Yeah.
To me, that is just malpractice, criminal. I mean, it is outrageous that you've deemed this person so dangerous that they need to be in a hospital, but they can't be.
You know, and for our government to have so much money to spend, and for, you know, these really important things to fall so very short.
Oh, my goodness.
It's criminal, you know. Yeah, you mentioned the military-industrial complex before, you know, like, isn't it a shame that we got, you know, plenty of bombs but not enough beds?
Oh, well, and that's the thing. I mean, you know, how do we want to take care of people? I mean, in one way, sense, and in judgment, taking care of people is by blowing them up. I'm not a fan of that.
That's the mafia way of
right?
Taking care of people.
Exactly. I know a guy. Let's just say I know a guy, all right?
Yeah.
But, you know, the thing is, really, I mean, how do we take care of our people in our community? You know, nobody wants to be hospitalized for the remainder of their life, and nobody's suggesting that we do that. But having the ability to sometimes, what I say, hit the reset button because things have gotten so far out of control and people need that level of help. I mean, whether it's chemical health, mental health, whatever. You know, there's been a focus on chemical health, and there's plenty of treatment beds out there, but you know, oftentimes, you know, we see these co-occurring diagnoses of mental and chemical health, and if we're not addressing the mental health, we sure as heck can't address the chemical health.
For sure.
You know, because if you're actively hallucinating because of an underlying psychotic disorder, and the reason that you're using meth or whatever it is because you can't cope, we really need to address both of those issues. My opinion.
Yeah.
And I am somewhat of an expert on that. I am actually a mental health practitioner.
Yeah.
You know, and I've worked in this industry for, you know, again, quite a while. So.
Yeah. Well, we can circle back. I got some things written down. We're only at I don't know what kind of time restraints you got, but we're only at a little more than an hour and a half, I want to say.
Yeah, I got nowhere I need to be.
So, one thing I guess I'd like to bring up that I have just written down on my notes somewhere along the line. I thought of the Harvard being sued by Asian students. Have you heard about this at all?
It's vaguely on my radar, but refresh me on the details.
So
like
basically, Harvard has more stringent acceptance on Asian students than they do on everybody else, basically. And so we're not just, you know, let's not forget that the country of India is
part of Asia.
Part of Asia.
Right.
I think a lot of people forget that one. So yeah, we're not just talking about, you know, Chinese immigrants and those people who are
billions of people.
Yes, but you know, I guess those people who are sort of classically known as being great in math or whatever, but Indians are classically
Oriental
known as
is not, you know, and again, that's not the.
So yeah, Asian Americans overall we're talking about just have a much stringent. It's really difficult for them to get in, and basically, so there's a class action lawsuit against Harvard, saying, you know, that they're being discriminated against, and Harvard is basically saying, well, if we didn't have, you know, a variable, if all of Harvard would just be full of Asians. And so, like, in the interest of diversity, you know, so I guess this sort of swings back. I think probably the root of it then was, you know, probably affirmative action.
Yeah, quotas.
Right?
Things like that.
Quotas,
you
things like that.
Interesting concept. You know, I mean, in a grander sense, I mean, I think looking at perhaps the Ivy League system as a whole in being kind of interesting and goofy. I mean, you look at, I mean, these are colleges that often reward legacies and things like that, which
Right.
And you look at the admissions scandals that they've had, with Hollywood and whatever.
Yeah.
Paying to get
And it's
kids in.
Prime example of how education, formal education especially, doesn't equate intelligence.
Oh no, it doesn't, and it also is inherently biased in so many ways.
Yeah.
And it really. So this is again, you get back to things looking at like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, who proposed some plans to make state institutions tuition free or whatever. I think in a lot of ways I look at trying to level the playing field in terms of allowing people to have an opportunity that they may not otherwise have. And I think that's sort of one of the things that the caveats that people in the world is, well, hey, we want people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And I'm like, that's not a bad plan. Let's make sure everybody's got a pair of boots then.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. A big, there's the sort of the term, oh, geez, I'm losing my spot again. Equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome.
Right.
And even that reality is like, well, no matter what, because of geometric locations and all sorts of different factors, you're never going to have complete. You
can't make it equal for everybody all the time. It's a pipe dream.
Yeah,
for sure.
And to circle all the way back to white privilege, I think something that gets glossed over is the reality of economic privilege.
That even that's a far bigger.
Even the slightest difference in tax brackets can have a huge impact on where your children end up after high school.
Incredibly, socioeconomic status is probably far more impactful than just racial status. There are different stratas within all of those things, certainly, and all of these things make an impact on some level, but socioeconomic status overall is a greater predictor of future success. If you're raised in an environment where you have your needs met. I don't know if you're familiar with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
No.
So it's a pyramid. It's an pretty old concept within like psychology.
How do you spell that?
Maslow, I think Maslow, and then just hierarchy of needs. It's a pretty simplistic approach, and there are some newer philosophies that break it down into maybe finer categories, but basically it starts out with having all of your basic needs met and then goes all the way up to the top of the pyramid where you're reaching self-actualization or being the best you that you can be kind of thing. And very few people often reach that goal, but the key here is that at the base of the pyramid, things like food and shelter and clothing, your basic needs need to be met. And so you look at people who are living in poverty, and this is where the socioeconomic piece comes in, is that oftentimes those basic needs aren't met, or they're not met daily. They're met very inconsistently, and so often people are always, they're born into this situation where they're always in survival mode. Like, I can only get through today. We talk about people. It's always funny to me. I see these like economic advice people on like MSNBC and other networks that are like, okay, so instead of buying that latte today, we're going to take that $5 and we're going to put it away. We're going to do this. Okay, lady, that ain't going to help people who are actually in poverty. Okay, these are people that don't know if they're going to get a meal today. These are people that don't know if they're going to have a roof over their head tonight. So they're figuring out, where am I going to stay? How am I going to stay warm? What am I going to eat? And that is the everything. And so they're saying, okay, so let's say there's some chemical use that goes along with that too. You know what? My life is terrible every day. I don't have a real good way to fix that. I am in survival mode. $20. I can probably scrape together $20. I can get me some heroin for $20. And while I know maybe intellectually that is not going to make my day better, it's going to numb me out to the fact that my life sucks every day. And I'm going to be in survival mode and all this, so that you just get this perpetual cycle of being caught there. And then the lady on the TV is saying, skip the latte.
Yeah. I mean, when you're at sum zero, when you're in survival mode, it's just today. That's all you're, there is no looking forward to, geez, what am I going to be doing 5 years from now?
Right. Yeah,
what's
my long-term goal?
What's my retirement plan? There's no retirement plan. There's a, how am I going to eat today, get to work for the rest of the week on a quarter tank of gas, and pay my rent on the first.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, people try to give and again, the hierarchy of needs thing is a pretty simplistic approach too, and it's broken down further by other people who've done more research on this. But it's ultimately getting your needs met. So, and that's sort of this whole starting out with a pair of boots. If everybody is getting their basic needs met, and this even gets back to sort of the universal basic income and things like that. I mean, I tend to view healthcare and housing and having a stable environment as things that I would like to say, for lack of a better way of putting it, should be a human right. People should have a right to a stable environment to live in, to have their physical health needs addressed when needed, and those types of things. Because I think if everybody had those things met, that then gives them the opportunity to be a contributing member of society, for lack of a better way of putting it. And again, I mean, I'm not saying I have a plan to make that happen, or how do we get there, or what do we do.
And here's a great example on phrases, is where I would tend to agree with you that I think a civilized society like ours should be able to provide those to people in need. I sort of draw a line between sort of like what's called negative rights versus positive rights, whereas that's what would be called a positive right. It's something that is, provided, whereas a negative right is just something that you inherently already basically have. The right to free speech, the right to bear arms, like you don't get an arm, you just have the right to go out and get them. But, like I said, I think this is just a area where we're just phrasing things so much differently. Whereas like I would not want to call that a right and say the government has to provide those, but yet I'm in favor of them.
Right.
So again, I think it's interesting how we're able to come to the same conclusion, but yet philosophically, at least philosophically, we're approaching it differently.
Well, and that is a lot of it. It's similar goals, but how do we get there is maybe a different beast altogether, and that's fine, because I think, again, I don't have all the answers. And there may be a more efficient way to find the answer to that than the idea. Because the cool thing about my job and what I've done over the years is I've had the opportunity to work on what they would call multidisciplinary teams, where I was like the social worker person, but they had like a nurse and a doctor, and we're all sort of working toward the same goal with a client, but there are different perspectives. And what that really taught me is that I tend to view things. Well, we all have filters, right? Our life experience and our knowledge is sort of our filter. So we tend to view things from that filter, but so when you have people from differing perspectives working toward the same ultimate goal, you often are exposed to ideas that you wouldn't think about.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most rewarding pieces of my career at times, is that I have had my eyes opened to so many of those things that I just look at them like, it is invaluable to me to get other perspectives, particularly when I'm feeling stuck. If I'm feeling like I don't know how to solve a problem, one of the greatest things that I can do is go talk to somebody that has a different perspective, because they're going to see it differently, and they may not have the answer either, but they might bring something up and get me to look at it a little bit differently. So I go, oh man, I didn't even think about doing that thing because that could totally fix this part of it, which should get this part going, and we're going to do this over here.
Yeah.
You know, which is just a tremendously
apparently
beneficial.
Science labs are like notorious for that.
Well,
like,
yeah.
You know, you got 4 engineers in one room and they can't figure out this problem, you know, because they're all thinking about the problem from the same,
Right.
you know, engineering perspective, you know, and the chemist, you know, 2 doors down, he knows exactly how to solve your problem, you know, but you're in different labs and you're not communicating. Apparently that's something that's like quite common within the scientific community, which is something that the internet really helped open up, and they, like, do conferences and stuff now to like try to get out of their own little echo chambers of like, okay, well, just because he's a chemist doesn't mean he can't help solve our engineering problem,
right? Well, and that's the thing, and I mean, I think that's true in life, in politics, and all sorts of things. Is that we don't. Not one of us. If you think you know everything, then you're a moron.
Right? Yeah.
You know, because the fact of the matter is nobody can know everything. I mean, I work with all kinds of experts in all kinds of areas. And I was recently working with an attorney who was very misinformed about trust law, and she said some things in court that were completely inaccurate and caused me some distress because I shouldn't be more of an expert on trust law than a lawyer,
right?
But because this lawyer had no background in it, I was the expert in the room.
Yeah.
And I, as a social worker, I am not afforded the same authority in a courtroom as an attorney is,
right?
So I don't have the opportunity to speak to that, which is frustrating. But you know, the thing is, I mean, that's the deal. I mean, the truly bright people that I have had the ability to work with over the years are the people that can tell me, you know what, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
You know,
sure.
And people, in my opinion, who are intelligent don't tell you they are.
Yeah. Right.
You know, kind of universal in that respect, because you know, and I think even Einstein has, and I've always murdered this quote, but it said something along the lines of like, you know, if you judge a fish by his ability to climb a tree, you know, I mean, I'm sure you've seen something like that.
Yeah.
You know, because I mean, we're all experts in something, right? You know, like you could probably do a béarnaise sauce and make it not break. I have a hard time with that. Like, I'm familiar with a béarnaise. I know what goes into it, and I'm not good at making it happen. But you've probably done a few in your life.
I could make it over without the double boiler on the flame and get it done in about 4 minutes.
Yeah,
flat.
no. See, I got the internet. I got my phone out in front of me.
I probably haven't done it in 12 years, and I bet I could probably, you know, whip it up in less than 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I tell you, I love a good béarnaise.
Yeah.
but you know, that's the thing. I mean, and we're all experts in things, you know, and to pretend to be an expert in an area where you're not, and I think this is again where social media plays a big role, because everybody in the internet, when they're a keyboard warrior and they're like, you know, I know everything about everything, you know. I mean, suddenly everybody's, you know, an expert on Middle East politics and whatever.
Right.
The only expertise I have offered in that realm is I wish we would quit killing people, because I don't like that.
I completely agree. Yeah, it's me and Tom touched on it last week, and I'm like, you know, and this is so complex. It's so complex.
Yeah.
I have such a novice understanding of it, but the one thing I understand is we're deeper in debt, and we've been killing people, and it hasn't done any like a good. It hasn't done any good. I don't think it's done either one of our nations any good whatsoever.
No.
You know, I mean, as bad as a lot of those Middle Eastern players seem to be, at least they are indeed stabilizing characters or what have you, you know. Yeah, I mean, you know, if we're gonna call Saudi Arabia our friend, you know, and they're gonna keep women from driving and throw gays from the tops of buildings, I don't think that we should be calling other people in the area our enemies who, you know.
Well, it was my understanding
let's just forget about it.
The majority of the 9/11 folks were from there.
Saudi Arabia. Yeah, I think like 19 out of 21.
Yeah. And again, I'm not trying to say that I have any expertise in that area.
No.
I think the more people we kill, the more generations of young people are going to be really angry with us.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
And again, I mean, there's an economic expense to that.
7, 8 nations now that we're bombing.
Yeah,
I mean, most people don't realize we're also bombing in Yemen, and we're pretty active in Africa.
Yep.
For reasons that I'm still very confused about.
Well, and that was, again, I did not support Obama doing that. I was a little on the younger end of the spectrum when Clinton was doing it, but I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's another forgotten war. Bosnia and Herzegovina.
I have a really good friend who actually was involved in those conflicts, and he was, interestingly enough, a part of the incident that became the film Black Hawk Down.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was one of the Army Rangers that went in to save the people.
He would come in and have a conversation, man.
He lives in Oklahoma, but he'd probably be. I don't know. I mean, he doesn't really talk about it a whole lot. I mean, he'll tell people that he was involved.
I know, and that's the issue I'm facing. I'm trying to get vets on, if anybody's listening and knows vets that are willing to come on and just share their stories. I think it'd be nice to get some of those stories preserved.
Well, and he's a prime example of somebody who has a very differing opinion politically on so many things, but he's been a tremendous friend of mine since we were kids. And we often disagree politically, but I love the man like a brother, and I know he loves me too. And that's again where a lot of this stuff boils down to, is that those things in real day-to-day life that the politicians harp on, they aren't that material to my interaction with the humans around me. And again, I mean, this is a guy that, out of high school, he joined the Army. I don't like people telling me what to do, man. I would not survive in the military very well.
Yeah.
I would get kicked out probably immediately. I struggle with authority. And I'd be like, you want me to do what now? Yeah, I don't know, sorry. That's not how this guy works.
Right.
So again, I would not be a good fit. But he ended up being a guy that, he joined the Army, ended up going to Ranger School, being pretty gung-ho on it, and he did his service. I don't recall how many years he did, but he did his time. He was actually shot like 5 times. So
he's legit.
I really, and it's interesting because we talk about thanking vets for their service, and I do certainly appreciate everything that people have done in the name of the honor of this country. But you look at sort of the conflicts that we've had since World War II. And the government likes to tell us that we're fighting for freedom, or for our freedom, and you see these memes and stuff. They're like, if you enjoyed